All units, Irene. I say again, Irene.
The November issue of Exceptional Parent magazine has two themes: financial information and parenting more than one child with disabilities. Read all for free at www.epmagazine.com. Follow EP Magazine on Facebook, Exceptional Parent Mag, and on Instagram and X at EPMZine.
Monotony. It comes in all shapes and sizes. Dull, tedious, just plain boring. But what is this? A contender, perhaps? Something unboring by the looks of it. Jabs right at dull, an uppercut to tedium, something that keeps you on your toes, keeps your head on a swivel. A knockout punch to your old, boring workouts. Welcome to Fight Camp.
Am I under arrest?
You've assaulted an innocent man in front of his wife and baby girl. Do you remember any of that?
Does the defendant have any priors?
Resisting arrest, DUI, assault.
My client has been awarded a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star Medal for his combat service.
I'm ordering you to undergo a 60-day outpatient rehabilitation program. Good luck.
Nah, I'm not doing that. Do you know what the VA's put me through?
If you have a brain in your head, you're going to listen to me right now. Because the next time you try to provoke a lethal response from law enforcement, you might not have an angel sitting on your shoulder.
The courts think that you're gonna fix me.
I hate to disappoint you, but I can't fix you. That's your job, not mine.
Did you know that your father got out?
He's a dangerous man, Calvin. Be careful.
We came back, and they spat on us at the airport. No homecoming parade, no celebrations.
You can't pretend like you have any idea what it's like to be in combat.
No, but what I do know is this field of work that I've dedicated my life to has helped a lot of people.
When you got back, something was different. It wasn't that you'd changed. You'd been replaced.
You lose your morality when you go to war. And the hard part is coming back to a civilian society that doesn't have any idea what's going on in your head.
It's hard to believe my enemy is the man I used to be.
I bet you wonder, where's my tribe? And I ain't talking about no friendship neither. I'm talking about brotherhood.
What is it that you truly want, Calvin?
I just want to wake up in the morning and feel something.
My pain is relative, son. Sometimes we gotta fall apart to find ourselves all over again.
You were willing to give your life for your country. Now maybe you can try living for it.
What are you feeding this guy? Look at this.
What do you want? I did 4 tours.
Of the Cheesecake Factory.
Oh! Okay. Little spicy, little spicy.
The movie, music, news, television promos, trailers, and videos used by Oscar Mike Radio are protected by the Fair Use Act. Section 107 of the Copyright Act. 1. The purpose and character of the use, including whether such use is of commercial nature or is for non-profit educational purposes. 2. The nature of the copyrighted work. 3. The amount and substantiality of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. 4. The effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work.
I joined the military to be a part of something bigger, and solving complex problems was part of the job. But when it came to my mental health, I had no clue where to start.
Thankfully, you didn't need to figure it out alone.
If the veteran in your life is having a hard time, you can be the one to offer help.
VA has resources like family education about mental health challenges, couples therapy, and parenting courses, so you can help your veteran build a brighter future.
Learn more about resources available at mentalhealth.va.gov/families.
Hello and welcome again to Oscar Mike Radio. My name is Travis, Marine Corps veteran and your host. We're in year 9. We're counting down to 500, and I'm so happy to be here. I want to thank my sponsor, Joyce Asek of Asek Real Estate, Echo 6 Designs out of Texas, and my supporters, Cason Shaving Company, Exceptional Parent Magazine, and Fight Camp. Be your strongest combination. It's an exciting time here. I've had some great guests coming up for the rest of the year, and you know, I love talking to authors. I love to read. And I don't think I've ever had a poet on Oscar Mike Radio before. So it's with great pleasure and honor that I introduce my next guest, Army veteran, officer, writer, and a bunch of other things, Ryan McDermott. Welcome to Oscar Mike Radio. Thank you so much for joining me.
Travis, thanks for having me.
So I got the news across the wire that, hey, there's this book called Downriver, and what that's about, and yes, a memoir of a warrior poet. And I'm like, I've never talked to a poet, and I know a little bit about poetry. I haven't read a lot of it, but I'm like instantly interested. And then it was really a challenge, Ryan, because in some ways the book was very insightful and deep in some regards, as poetry can be, but the backstory was also very interesting. So this is going to be a fun conversation. Before we get into all the good stuff with the book, and it's all good, kind of tell us, who the person Ryan is growing up and going into the Army, please.
Well, Travis, that's a great place to start. My book starts kind of at a rock bottom moment, and then kind of proceeds sort of through counseling sessions. We look back at different parts of my life. In the first part of my life, I think every veteran, I think, has an origin story to a degree of why we ended up serving. And for me, it was rooted in a sort of desire to serve the country, I think, out of, patriotic values that I think we all have who serve. And also, I was sort of raised in a lower middle class background. I would say my biological father was not involved with my life. They sort of denied paternity and moved on. And my mom raised me as a single parent. And so her father, my grandfather, was an Air Force enlisted soldier or airman, and had retired in Orlando, Florida. And so my mom raised me in that construct. She was worked at like a 7-Eleven when I was growing up, and then moved on. Eventually married my stepfather. Had a normal family life for the most part. We suburbs of Orlando. Things were pretty stable. We had 2 sisters and so forth. But they financed their home with like a balloon note, and so they could never refinance. And they never had stability because he was in construction. My stepdad was in construction. And so I had a relatively unstable sort of life in that regard. And so that was one thing, I guess, looking back, that sort of planted this idea that the military was a very certain path, hard path, but something as I looked closer and closer at that path, that it offered a unique sort of opportunity for me. And so leading up to my senior year of high school, I began to think about, did pretty well. So I looked at the academy, and I started doing pretty well and applying to the academy. But at the same time, my parents' marriage fell apart. And so I had a very chaotic senior year, and in that process, I lost my home. My stepfather moved out. My sisters moved in with him, and my mom sort of deteriorated. And I go through, that's kind of the part 1 of the book, is I go through that whole process. And as I was awaiting my appointment, that letter, and eventually I did get that letter, but it was after I ended up moving in with a best friend of mine to finish out my high school. So that's a little bit of the background. I ended up getting into West Point, but I think that's kind of, my background is Floridian or grew up in Orlando, never left the state of Florida before I went off to West Point. I mean, that's the furthest far I had been north was Jacksonville, and I don't even think I went south of Miami. So my world was relatively small, and so when joining the military for me was kind of this big journey, this epic sort of adventure I would be on.
What was it like going through West Point? I've heard it's a very rigorous experience, very demanding experience with a high set of values. And, it gets cold in the wintertime because I'm up in this area. So it had to be a lot of change for you in a very short amount of time, but with a very high expectation of accomplishing the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was applying, it was like this mythical place that I didn't even know where it was. It's an hour north of New York City. I didn't know that when I was sort of first started out, and I had never been there before I got there. So when I showed up off a bus and I'm getting yelled at by people, it's sort of a stressful thing. The 4 years at West Point are very structured, so very demanding on your time. You're in class. Academics are very rigid. There's not a lot of time for social activity, frankly speaking. And you drill and ceremony, and and in your summers while you're there are like you're doing training. You're spending a lot of it doing training, and you might get a few weeks off during the summer for leave or whatever. But it is a very stressful 4 years, and not a lot of people are like, oh, I'm gonna miss this place. People are very happy to graduate, happy to go into the Army. And by that point in time, and lead soldiers, it's interesting because for me, I started journal writing because of that kind of. I mean, the one thing about West Point for me personally was it offered a sanctuary. Although it was like very stressful, there was a situation where I had a sanctuary where I had 3 square meals a day. I had people that cared about me, even though there's a high stress environment, but there's a high support environment, high stress, high support. And, I began writing though as a way to process the stuff I had just dealt with in high school, but also what I was dealing with in college.
You go through the West Point process and you start writing. It was more journaling, but
Mm-hmm.
Did you really enjoy the writing, aspect of writing?
Yeah, I mean, at first it was sort of like a mechanical thing where I started it like a couple lines. For the book, I pull from that for that part of the book, for that chapter. It's a unique chapter in that regard because it really is the writings from way back when, a little bit modified. I pruned some stuff, but it started out mundane. But then the writing, and that's what is kind of intended to show, is in the the reader should see the development of my writing as it goes from like my first kind of.
I did.
Yeah.
I saw, like, to put in the vernacular, growth.
Yeah.
Like you kind of settled into your writing style and what you wanted to communicate. And then once you were able to accept that, the whole part of you changed, and we were able to really see who Ryan was and what you were trying to communicate.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and a lot of it, is the first part. The first part of my West Point experience was just trying to survive, and a little bit looking back and everything, and then it began to evolve into, sort of more social stuff, like wanting connection, and then aspiring for family and love. Frankly speaking, I mean, that's where my memoir is probably more. It's very personal. A lot of people hold their personal aspirations and in that regard in close confines and private, but I want there's a part of that's really important for my story as it sets up is to really show that aspiration. I think a lot of men and women who serve, we are deeply committed to our families, and not just our immediate family but our broader family, and it's because we're protectors and providers and so forth. But the writing it sort of concludes, that the West Point was, it's an interesting 4 years, and I don't want to skip to it, but like my son just graduated, and it's a lot shorter as a parent seeing it could go by than it was going through it. I still have dreams. I have to go back to West Point.
Now, you graduated, if I remember correctly, around, the year 2000, right before
Yeah.
9/11. And did you see when you graduated, did you see your Army career going this way at all when you graduated?
It's interesting. I mean, I think in some ways there was like a feeling that something could happen where we might go to war. I don't know, but I remember it was interesting because for me, that journey was 2000, I graduated, go on leave, kind of I reconnected with my biological father as a part of my own growth and met my sister, and that ties into the whole story of how I ended up meeting my wife. But I spent the year training, so I went to the basic course, and at Fort Benning, Georgia. It's in Columbus, Georgia. And then, and in January, I can't remember what, but I had to do a course in the Bradley Leader course, and then eventually Ranger School the following May. And there's some gaps where, there's between the courses that you're just there doing other things. And I ended up, going to, and this is around the time I met my wife, and then 9/11 happens. And 9/11, I mean, I go into this in the book, but it was surreal. So I had just moved to Savannah, Georgia to sign into the 3rd Infantry Division. And, it was an exciting time. I'm about to sort of, I'm just now getting to the Army. And you think, oh, I'm going to have time to prepare for whatever's going to come. Well, my roommate and I were both signing in the same day. It was like 7 o'clock. I can't remember exactly what time. It was around 8 o'clock. It was we were on our way into Fort Stewart when the first planes began to hit on 9/11. And so it was kind of a faint thing. It was kind of weird because we were going into the headquarters where, you go to the battalion headquarters where you're trying to sign in everything,
Right.
and staff there, and you're just like the person who's showing up. And I'm like, hey, and they're watching stuff on the news, and it's not really, because, I think everybody felt this. It was like not immediate, like, what's going on? What is this? 9/11 now, we have a whole context for it. But in the moment that it was happening, it was surreal that, we're just like, we just signed out and we left. And then we listened to 9/11 on the radio on our way back to the house. And by the time we got back to our place in Savannah, it's about an hour drive. It was like very clear that like this was a very much a coordinated attack. The buildings came down, and then so we were supposed to get a little bit of time to kind of move in and settle into our apartment. Nope, next day we were at the unit. I was taking over my platoon.
You lead these men, and you're having to do this all like this. It's going quick. I don't want to go too deep into it, but there had to be a time of like, wait a minute, this is all just coming quick, quick, quick. And I've always wondered how, some of us enlisted guys, or, a lot of us enlisted guys, like, officers got it easy. But I'm finding out the longer I do this that it's no cakewalk for you all either. There's a lot expected and a lot to manage. But I still wonder, like, how do you manage all the expectations, lead your troops, lead your soldiers, and focus on the mission with all this stuff going on?
Well, I mean, I have to say, a lieutenant, or especially a butter bar who's like a second lieutenant, is probably worth less than a private, to a degree. But, there's a lot of, I think one of the, there's just different roles. It's funny because now I'm just like, my guys we're just a group of guys. Like I had that role, but everybody's role was important in that platoon. And so it's interesting to think about it in that context. But it is, I mean, I personally think every soldier has a lot of responsibilities, just different roles. And, the role of a young officer is really, one, is to learn. And I think the most important thing a platoon leader does is make tactical decisions on the battlefield, carry out orders, and really, because they're in the sort of chain of command, leadership responsibility. The platoon sergeant has a very important role, and it's like a sort of battle buddy in a way, of, for the execution. And in a mechanized unit too, it's also different because you're dealing with tank, sort of Bradley commanders slash tank commanders, and those are the primary maneuver things. So you got a battle buddy who you're working with, and sections and so forth. Um, but I have enormous respect for my soul. I still in touch with as many as that I can on Facebook. But everyone's got their sort of sectors of fire, sort of say, of what they're responsible for, and it takes the entire unit to really. And that one thing that happened is immediately we didn't. It was sort of like an initial, oh, we got to get ready, but then it was like, well, we've got to get. We'll see how things go. So we ended up kind of getting ramped up, like get ready, but then it was like more we weren't like any immediate pipeline for Afghanistan. So we ended up doing training, like we went to the National Training Center, the OP4. It was really good for me to get that because it wasn't like we were going to go straight to war. I had a year and 3 months, or like almost a year and a half before we crossed the border. I had been a platoon leader for like a year and a half, and a lot of responsibilities of platoon leader. It's not in the book. I don't think so, but I was like the unit movement officer. I had to do a lot of administrative stuff, and there's a lot of administrative stuff that the officer corps ends up doing, planning, that sort of stuff, and making sure that the orders make sense and integrate. And but I had I was kind of I had to do the tedious, like make sure the mill vans are packed to spec, make sure the plans are, it's like all very tedious stuff. Make sure awards, the whole awards process was working, and a lot of mechanics there. So, but it's interesting because by the time we got to Kuwait, my company was very highly trained, which is why we ended up being, I think, chosen to be at the tip of the spear.
Were you still writing and working on your writing during all this? Was it just, maybe you had some time at night or on a plane or whatever, and you wrote? Was it like that, or did you kind of put it on hold during this high tempo time?
Well, I put the reflective writing on hold, and so that's a great question because it's not like I'm constantly writing. So for me, it's kind of like this. There are periods of time where I've done a lot of reflective writing where I'll write about a whole chapter, and then there's other times where I'm just iterating on it and just like refining it. At that time, I was writing my wife, and just writing letters to her. So I have a whole stack of letters every day. Wrote a letter, and I have got those in a safe place. I've actually thought about like transcribing them at some point. Might be neat. It's interesting because that is a story of in itself because at some point we didn't have the internet, right? We no longer had internet, the capability, and so you were 100% reliant on the written letter sent in an envelope. And so what's interesting is it kind of mirrored the separation because you send that off, it takes 2 to 3 weeks to get there. I mean, seriously. And then the letter when you get a letter, you realize, oh, this was written 2 to 3 weeks ago. And if you cycle that in of like what they know about your life and what you know about their life, it's like at least a month of a distance of what's going on in their life. And it's interesting because as you kind of get through it, it's like we're talking about different things and her life, she sent letters, and so kind of going on a tangent there. But my writing in the war was really pen to paper. And I used some of that to kind of and there's actually a letter in the book from my son, a letter to my son. Yeah.
You serve in war and you serve at a high level, and, you're heavily decorated, and then you transition out. And, again, tongue in cheek, there was a time, sir, where I felt that officers got out and there was a stretch limo pulls up to the TAPS class. They take them home, they roll out the red carpet, and everything's fine for them. And I got very politely but very firmly told that that's not the case. Some officers have the very same problems that us enlisted have in different ways. But your transition was different because you get out and you go right into your professional career, and you had a family, and you had other things going on. And that's where it really seemed like the idea for the book and the reflection really took place. Kind of go into that for me, please.
Yeah, so when I got back from Iraq in '03, there was a period of time where they were like, you're going back, right? And then I made a decision, I need to get out. And so I dropped my paperwork. I went to a new unit, and it was a sort of a refresh, reset thing. And when I got to that unit, I actually really enjoyed being on the staff, and I did a lot of writing of work, like planning and stuff like that. I started writing there. That's actually when I started writing. So I actually, from like 2004 to 2006, so that's 2 years. So there's a whole year of prep, and then there was a year where the unit deployed. And I had already decided to get out, so they put me. I was put on rear detachment, and I spent that entire time like writing, really, and writing the chapters, like sort of in the downtimes, not all the time, but like in my downtime, I would write it, and I ended up writing chapters about the rear detachment. And I have to say the rear detachment and what the rear detachment role is like taking care of the families. And it's sort of unseen when you're deployed. It's kind of like whatever, there's somebody back there, whatever, there's all this stuff. But it's there's soldiers who are assigned to the family readiness groups to make sure that the families are connected, with to the military. And it evolved even after I left. And so there was a whole year I was on that detail where we had to, any time of the day I could get a call saying, "Hey, we've got casualties." And I'll remember it was near the end of February when I got that call and it was early on in that deployment in 2006 where I got that call, and then I was told we had 2 casualties. And there's a period of time where I know information that the family members don't even know, and nobody knows, and I have to keep it quiet. I can't even really let my wife know. And it's hard. And so then you go, there's a whole process by which, the family is let known. We invite them to come to the Fort Stewart for a ceremony. And there's a whole process. We welcome them and help them grieve, because we were grieving. We were grieving for the loss of Minsu Choi and Landon Giles, our two heroes we lost that year. And so that affected some of my writing. I wrote about that as well before. And during this process, I was applying to business school and then and then I eventually went to business school. So I used that as a transition year to move to business school. And I did 2 years of business school at University of Virginia, the Darden School of Business. And I had to finance it with loans. I did not come up with.
Just curious, what drew you to business
Hmm?
post infantry, mobile infantry type work? What drew you to business?
Well, kind of the challenge. Well, I was attracted to the idea of going into a challenge, like a very rigorous, challenging environment, which investment banking was like kind of the thing I was interested in doing. And I'd done Ranger School and all that, and there's an intensity about it. And so, but in my undergrad, I majored in economics and it was interested in that world. And there's also this aspect of, when I was a kid growing up, like those forces just seemed so distant, in like a distant galaxy to me. And it was sort of like this aspirational, like, I wonder what that world is like, and I wonder what I could learn from it and experience it. And so when I got to business school, I started looking at that path more seriously. It offers the potential for like signing bonuses, which I needed to kind of get through my second year of business school, because I didn't have like parents to pay for it. I took it, and they didn't have the post 9/11 GI Bill like finalized at that point.
Right.
So I had to like take out loans to pay for it, which and it was we had a family of 5 at this point. So we had we had 2, and then right before I started business school, we had our 3rd child.
Well, you talk about your family a lot in the book, and as a father and a parent, there's a lot that you don't say that comes through, and you talk about the toll and how your wife had to hold her part together and how you were trying to go through business school and keep focused on that because you were trying to build a better life for your family. And it was a really, tough balance between you two. And it was really, don't think it's the wrong way. It was really refreshing to read that because sometimes it's glossed over and we just got through it and, we just made it work. But I think your story, the way you did it in your book, really, hey, I wouldn't be here without my wife. And yes, we had some hard times. Why did you choose to share those hard times in that way? Because some people do, but most people wouldn't have.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So there's, how there's one this in a practical way. I just have to say with Lucy, I I felt a challenge of like how much do I talk about, her. There was like a literary critic that said, hey, we want to know more about Lucy and everything like that. And the thing is, Lucy does not want everything sort of out there, like necessarily, right? So there's an aspect of trying to balance the story of telling what I wanted to tell for my part of the story, illuminate how what I was experiencing was causing stress in her life, and also something, like feeding that, the overall the challenging situation, right? But also respecting, the privacy of people in the story. There is that thing of like trying to make sure that there's some level of comfort with it. But that kind of gets to the purpose of writing this, and why I put this out there is, there's soldier veterans commit suicide. There's a lot of people that, and I think one of the purpose of telling the story in a real way where I kind of go into some of the problems we had has to do about everyone has problems. Everyone has challenges. I mean, even very fortunate people have relationship issues. And it's to make people feel like, hey, I'm not alone. I had a person who I didn't know that well read the book, and then we got to be close because he told me that, I thought this was something different, but your vulnerability showed me that, like, I'm kind of going through that right now. And so it's to kind of help readers. There's some people who may think they're going through it now, read it like and say, oh, you know what? I connect with some of that and I don't feel alone, and kind of see that.
It was really refreshing to read it because I'm like, wow, it was at that point that I really connected with the whole overreaching theme of the book, which to me, and maybe I'm wrong here, but there's a real aspect of this is downriver, water under the bridge, but this is about healing. I'm trying to understand how to heal between me and my wife, me and my children, me and my past, and then me, Ryan, in the future. That's what I really started getting out of it at the time I started reading about the relationship between you and your wife. Did you choose this theme of healing and not really redemption, but definitely reconciliation as a theme for this?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. Very, but it's interesting because the writing process it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I'm going to write this book based on this. This book, the writing part was cathartic, and then eventually what happened is, the manuscript took different themes, but then you start to see the themes as you look back, and what I was looking for, as you're talking about reconciliation, that was the ultimate aim. If you think about the quest, what's the quest? The ultimate quest base is, as you get to the very end, the poem Downriver, it kind of lays it out symbolically. This idea of, sort of analogy of life, of being a river in a sense. And, the ending is like, it's really about at a minimum, reconciling with my children in a way to be the father they deserve. And that is ultimately the ultimate sort of theme of reconciliation and future focused.
So let's talk about the poem because I've done a little bit of writing. I wouldn't call myself a writer by trade, and I know how hard it is on a good day. But I have tried dabbling in poetry before, and I have a new respect for people who do it. But it takes focus, work, and effort. What drew you to poetry versus, say, just writing a narrative about saying, hey, this is where I'm at and this is what I want you to feel? Why did you choose poetry?
Well, I think poetry chose me, in that So no, I'll kind of get into that because, um, you know, practically speaking, I never considered the form until I was in West Point. We took a class where we had to recite poetry, actually, St. Crispin's speech, and a lot of, sort of Shakespeare type writing. And you had to write your own poem. So I wrote like a poem, very simplistic. It's in there. It's like a basic, like, okay, got it. And then what for me, where poetry sort of chose me is it came from a form of a sort of how do I translate emotion? And you see that in the West Point chapter is I had like an example, I had emotion about my father, my absent father. And there's a poem about that. And so at first, if I was to kind of guide people on how to write poetry, I would say, start with your emotion, like find something where you have emotion that's like you think is, and don't even think about it. Just write the story of it in a way that's a narrative. It doesn't have to rhyme, right? Like there's a poem in there where it's frustration. It's like just it kind of it doesn't rhyme at all, but it kind of conveys the emotion of kind of the reality of living in two different worlds, and I'm trying to like reconcile my worlds as a cadet. And but eventually you start to realize, for me, then it's like then it became kind of fun of like, well, how do I convey this emotion in a rhyme, in sort of rhythm? And
Yeah, I was going to ask about meter. Like some of your poems, you can tell technically they're poem. You have standard meter and
Yeah.
spacing and pacing. And then I get to the one with no meter, and I'm like, what's he doing to me here? So I was
Yeah.
very curious how that all matured over time.
Yeah, I mean, the way to think about that too is you're reading it and you're like the one with no meter is like that one is just raw. Like I didn't try to develop it any further. It was just, boom. And I kind of felt, I could have left some of them out. There's some that like, I'm like, there was a one critic that pulled one as a sort of quote. And I'm like, man, could you not, do you have to pull one that was like that to critique that specific one? Because I could have easily left that one out. Critique the one that I consider to be, the title, Downriver. Critique that one if you think it's, or maybe that's too harsh. I don't know. Yeah, yeah. There's some decisions that go in about what because I had like I think there's about 30 poems in there. I probably have like 80 that are in my West Point journals. And so a lot of them, that's kind of the thing. There's who's that producer that does, it's sort of like when there's people that have this philosophy about music. It's like just do everything, and then you go back and you're like, you know what? I like that. I like that. And so if you're interested in trying to like create something like that, just write and write and write, and then a lot of it's going to be garbage, and then like you'll realize, wow, this one here it's got potential, and then you develop it. And there's a couple that I actually did refine from their original form. That I like the Nightmare is one that I developed a little bit more fully from its original form, because the original form was more descriptive, didn't have like a sort of thing, and then I realized, you know what, I want to work on this and see what happens. And it became something different, but it conveyed the same emotion.
Speaking of emotion, what's happening to you? You go through and, we'll talk about this, your PTSD a little bit, but what is happening to you as you begin writing Downriver and putting this all together? Because people get changed by what you write for them to read, but this also changes the author, themselves sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I think, going back to the writing the Iraq chapters, right? After I got back. So, the Iraq War, we went through several major battles. We fought for the bridge over the Euphrates River. We fought for Baghdad International Airport. And there was like a stretch of like 4 or 5 days where it was like kind of like nonstop adrenaline, breaks in between, obviously, but anticipation, that build up, and then the after sort of continuing the mission. Um, you know, I think before it's one of those things where it's like the process, there's some challenge in opening up and going back and writing the stuff because it takes you that moment. My wife will tell you, she's like, Lucy will say, like I'm like not connected, when I was doing that, like totally in a different world. And I felt like I needed to kind of go through that in order to be like more present and just kind of work through that past experience. Coming back, like I remember, immediately I wasn't writing. It was like the day that I came back, it's are there threats on the highway, or, nightmares and stuff like that. Um, and sort of reactions to stressors. One thing I would kind of talk about with PTSD, you know, I think some of it has to do environmental, where when you're in the military, you're around people that have a shared experience.
Right.
So there's a shared experience, camaraderie, and understanding of what you've been through, right? And so I think there's a lot of it's an environment where I feel like there's natural support and understanding. Uh, when I went to business school, there were a few veterans, but not a lot. I mean, we're talking like very few, and at that time, and then on Wall Street, even fewer. And so by the time I got to Lehman Brothers, just it was very unsettling, because I was still dealing with, still wrestling with like seeing my friends who are overseas, some dying, people dying every day at that point still. And so there's a little bit of, sort of a disconnectedness and feeling of isolation because, at the time, like people in the sort of a lot of people in the civilian world just they could tune out. They don't have to tune on that channel. And it was, it was that plays a role in it as well.
You dealt with your own PTSD and you used Downriver and writing as a way to, help you through that. Do you have any perspective or advice you'd like to share to veterans who are dealing with their PTSD in their way that you could share with us?
Well, it's hard to say. I think one, just the first thing is to find purpose. Like you got to have a purpose because for me, it's my kids, right? Purpose that like a foundation. It can be that or, spiritual, if God, your faith, I think is really important. It's got to be, it can be helpful. Or not invaluable. But in terms of practical stuff, like one, I think connecting to the men and women you serve with. I mean, that's something that could have helped me is if I maintained connection with the guys I went to war with. We kind of lost touch. One guy went into the, Secret Service. Another guy went into pharmaceutical sales. A couple stayed in the military, right? And continue, a lot of them did. My soldiers kind of went to different worlds. And we connected, we connect on Facebook, but it's not like I think immediately started like having the conversations and so forth, or just even showing that kind of support. So you know, I think that would be my, one purpose. Two, connection to those you served with is really important. And, it's not just for yourself, but it's also for the veterans that you serve with, you think may need that connection because you never know, if somebody's suffering in silence. And it could be the platoon leader. It could be, if you're a soldier and you got, don't assume it's rank oriented. Everyone's human. And,
When you went through this writing process and finally held that first, what do they call like the first copy of the book that you make? It's not like the movie.
Oh, it's like an advanced reader copy.
Yeah. What started happening to you when that started coming together and you had dealt with, the past, you had laid out to your children and your wife and even people that you knew, what this process was for you. What did you feel when you held that advanced copy?
Well, it was certainly a significant moment. I've got it. I've got one here. I numbered it number one of the advanced reader copies because it's unique because it doesn't have some of the advanced praise quotes. That's kind of the point of it. So those to go in later. General Petraeus was one of the people that provided an advanced praise quote. Um, I'll tell you, to be honest, Travis, it felt like, okay, this is a great moment, but also like now it's time to get the message out to try to like do what that's kind of the whole purpose. I mean, there's a piece of this that, it's if a tree, it's like that saying, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? It's like if I publish this book, but nobody reads it, did it ever publish, So I've wanted, I don't, that finish line marked a new starting line. And, I appreciate you giving, this sharing this platform for that purpose because, um, there's a couple things the PTSD thing is one of them, but like I don't want it to it's not everything about that.
No,
There's the reconciliation piece. There's universal themes that I think everyone, doesn't matter if you served or not, think connect to. And so there's part of this is like, so now it's like getting the message out and trying to one, if for people who may, like consider like ways of processing things. If there's different ways writing could work. The other thing is too is like people. It's like, hey, you know what? I saw how people in Ryan's life helped him, and here I am referring to myself in the third person. But how people helped me. You can be that type of person, and it doesn't have to be direct. Like, hey, I'm gonna. It's just checking on people. You never know. You don't. It's like. Yeah, and it doesn't have to, it can just be like, hey, how you doing? Unless you want to grab lunch, grab coffee, let's catch up, sort of thing, or just send a note to somebody you haven't who is in your unit potentially, and if it's for veteran to veteran type thing. But it's yeah, it was a moment, and it's somewhat like dizzying because I have my normal work to do, and so I have a day, and it's a non. I have to say, it's kids are. I still got kids. There's. I tried to draw this line for the ending where it's a hopeful, optimistic ending, but I also wanted to kind of leave a little bit of. There's an uncertainty about it. It's not necessarily a happily ever after. We don't know like where the road's going to go, and there's still a work in progress.
Well, just before we start winding this down, I did want to know, because it was very clear to me that this was written for your family first, yourself, and then other people in your life. What was the initial reaction from your family when they read, Downriver?
Well, different. I don't know. It's interesting. I haven't really sat down. Like Lucy has been a little bit back and forth about, I mean, just being honest, she's been a little back and forth about like, okay, her life, she's a very private person, but overall supportive. And I think she understands why I'm trying to do this. I think same thing for my mom, right?
Yeah.
But I think my mom, I had a conversation with her recently and she was like praising the sort of like what I'm trying to do and getting the message out. I mean, a lot of these family members lived it. My father-in-law read it and he was like, wow. I mean, so I think of my family members, my father-in-law, I think his response, so he read it in like a day and a half or something, right? And he was very praising it. And I think it's interesting because, we've not necessarily always been super close or anything, but I think for him, it gave him a new insight on who I am. Um, and my son Brandon read an earlier version of it. And he's a part of that. He wrote the afterword, and so I don't, once I have to say like some folks have read like prior versions of this, and so it's kind of like, they're not necessarily in a rush to read the final product, and the final product it went through a lot of polish, so some of them saw the unrefined rock, and I spent several months working on iterations to get it, and then you have an editor do the final touch-ups.
It's very interesting that they had that reaction. I guess, what would you want the reader? I know what I got out of it. I got an appreciation for poetry. I got a new, I'm always impressed, respectful, and amazed about how varied the veteran experience is, how people from different backgrounds can get out of the military and use all kinds of different methods, means, ways to tell their story or deal with something, or bring honor and awareness to something that really impacted them, right? So there was that. And then I'm like, what's next? Like he's because the ending's not really set in stone, Ryan. It's not.
Yeah.
And I'm like, darn, he hooked me. I just bit on that hook, line, and sinker. So what's next? What is next?
Travis, I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, there is a story that's happened since then, because the epilogue kind of covers a lot of it. So the memoir is meant to kind of really, if you think about the quest as like a quest, right? It's the key, a key part is setting up the relationship with my family, my children in particular, and then ultimately the ending is tied together by the intergenerational transfer over to my son Brandon. The reconciliation there. There was, I didn't write about it, but there's a point in time where our relationship was very fractured, and he even saw it like a counselor and so forth, and it really forced me to think, work to become a better father in that regard, and being patient and everything. So what's next? I think we see. I mean, I feel like I have to go back to the book, see how I ended it. I think if I can, just real quick,
sure,
read the last parts of Downriver, the not the paragraph, but like the poem.
Please
It's
do.
I'll start here. Now I'm going back downriver, but it's a lonely route. It was the only way. I cannot see day, and I cannot make it right without going through the night and go insane and feel the pain. Before I reach the shallows, a walk to the gallows. With a lonely heart, this distance makes me feel. Heart feels empty. It needs plenty. I'm coming home. So I keep walking downriver for a place to cross the water. Promises that I need to deliver, and most of all, I still need to be a father. I think it's just a journey. Like, I'm just gonna continue focus on my family right now Brandon's going to basic course. My other kids are in college. I wanted to tell the story now because it's like there is not, there's a little bit like with Lucy and I of like uncertainty about, but we have a strong relationship, and we love each other, and but it's, life is messy. It's not, this is not a fairy tale, right? This is, and I think, Brandon, it's about, the story passed on lessons. So I don't know what's next. I don't know if somebody was asking me if I was going to write another book, and I'm like, man, this took me 15 years. Maybe I could. I've got some ideas of things that I could do, but, I want to try to, I'm trying to get the message out on this one. I think it's unique. The poetry thing, I think it's interesting you picked up on that, because from a narrative structure, it serves a purpose, which is to kind of take you to that moment in a way that's like pure, like you're there. And then the prose is kind of meant to set you up for emotional sort of moments and so forth, and hopefully it'd be a good read. And so what's next is Brandon, Julia and William, my kids. They're my story is, I think I say this in the book. My story is just prologue for the stories they're going to live out. And I think if we have that future orientation as America, and so I don't know if you picked up on this, but there's a narrative that I'm trying to like show that these, like Iraq, Lehman, some of these, and 9/11, we all lived through. They're traumatic experiences from a societal perspective. And to be candid, there's reconciliation we need in our country, I think, to a degree. And it starts on an individual level, and then in between, within communities and so forth. And I think part of my story is that we have to reconcile the past enough to really be focused on the future. And the future, as represented by my children, especially with Lucy, is really what bonded us strong together, is that common purpose of making a better life for our children is what unites us.
As a father, I'm just, like I said, I really resonated with that aspect of the book. No parent is perfect. I'm certainly not, but I think, you give hope that you can one day, if you have that situation with your children, you can, reconcile and be stronger. The aspect of your life partner, your wife, as a teammate, as she's in a gunfight with you and there with you, really came through. Regardless if you write again or not, I was really pleased and honored to read this book. And how can people? You're trying to get it out there. How do they get this? And is it just on Amazon, or is there other places? Do you have signed copies?
Well, Travis, that's a great point. I have the ability to do signed copies, I think, but I haven't sort of set up a mechanism to do that.
Yeah.
I would say right now, probably the best thing, Facebook. I have a Downriver Memoir of a Warrior Poet page. You can follow me there. I also have a Downriver Memoir website. You can look up, search my name, Ryan McDermott, in the title of the book. But if they want to buy they want to just buy the book, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, it's on all online retailers. I did this independent route, so I'm not necessarily in all the bookstores, but most people buy books online anyway. I would like to eventually do some sort of signings and stuff like that. If somebody reaches out to me, I have the mechanism sort of in the infancy of sort of how to do the shipping. I'm doing that for my soldiers. Like, there's a sergeant major a guy who retired as a sergeant major, and he was like, I want a copy of your book, and I was just like, I'm just gonna send him one of the if he wants to pay me later, great, but I want him to read it first, and so I personalized it and everything, because it means a lot to that. It reflects on his service too. So yeah, Downriver Memoir of a War Poet on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, and you can find it on all online retailers.
Well, I will have the links to the Facebook page. I have the link to your website where it has you and the book, and an Amazon link in the Awesome Mike Radio show post. Again, Ryan, thank you for coming on during this time as we count down number 500. It's a really exciting time for the show, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I like to read, and poetry was just a new wrinkle that I haven't dug into before, and I want to thank you for sharing so candidly.
Travis, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
There you go, folks. My guest, U.S. Army veteran Ryan McDermott, in the financial services now, author, father, husband. Check it out here on Awesome Mike Radio. As we say in Awesome Mike Radio, we are mission in flight. We'll see you next time.
Every generation, every sacrifice. Our nation's service members have stood up for our freedom, our families, and our future. Now it's our turn to stand up for them. This year, you can honor their service in a deeply personal way by sponsoring a $17 Veterans Wreath. Each wreath is more than a symbol. It's a heartfelt tribute to the heroes who served and to the families who carry their legacy. Visit wreathsacrossamerica.org to sponsor a wreath today. This isn't just a wreath. It's a personal gift to an American hero.
Thank you for listening and watching Oscar Mike Radio, where our active duty service members and veterans are in action and the mission is in flight. Oscar Mike Radio is an oversized load Co-Sinister One production. If you are a veteran or know a veteran who needs help, please dial 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line.